Hello, and welcome to Senior Living Marketing Perspectives. I'm Debbie Howard from Senior Living Smart. And today, to kick off 2021, I am thrilled to have Doug Davidoff, who is the founder and CEO of Imagine Business Development, as my first guest of the new year. So welcome, Doug.
Yeah, I'm still putting 2020 on the dates of my podcast here. So it's hard to believe that we're in 2021 already. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit. I was able to sit in on your session at Smash, which I greatly enjoyed. Great insights, and I love the fact that you're not exclusively in senior living, because a lot of the thought leadership that you're probably seeing in other industries can benefit senior living clients. Kind of think through things differently. So I think that perspective to me was really helpful. And so, but if people don't know Imagine Business Development and haven't gotten to hear you at Smash just yet, tell us a little bit about, what you do over there at Imagine.
I will do. As a matter of fact, someone tweeted earlier today to tweet the description of your career in a tweet. And so this is perfect for me. My career has always been about eliminating or mitigating the conflict between buyers and sellers. And really, that's what we do at Imagine, is we take a look at what a company is doing. We take a structural and systems approach to things. What we've discovered is most people have the raw material. Most organizations have the raw material to achieve what they want to achieve. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the recipe, the order, how things are mixed. In many cases, more what they're doing that they shouldn't be doing than what they're not doing, if you will. And so through that lens, what we do is really help ensure that the structure is in place to enable them to achieve predictable, sustainable, and scalable growth, however they define scalable. One of the things that you mentioned that just kind of hit is we don't specialize specifically in senior living or even multifamily. Our focus is high consideration, complex purchases or sales processes. We've never actually specialized in a specific vertical. Mm-hmm. To the chagrin of many advisors that I've worked with in the past. You need to focus. One of the things that I found from what we do is we all experience the same problems when it comes to growth, when it comes to sales and marketing. I used to be surprised. I'm now not surprised how often the inspiration or even the actual recipe to solve a problem is discovered from somebody in an industry that's totally unrelated. Like, we solved one of our biggest issues. We were working with a distributor of concrete materials to road contractors. And through that, kind of discovered a solution that some of our customers that were in tech were having. And so again, you never put those two people together, but it's exactly what you say. I think the inspiration oftentimes comes from unrelated things that you figure out how to apply, than just kind of rinse and repeat the same thing. So that's kind of a little bit of our philosophy.
Well, I love the idea of just kind of making it easier for buyers and sellers to connect efficiently and effectively and communicate better. So when you think about, as you're going through all the different verticals that you represent, are there any kind of common reasons why, people who seem to have the content and have the intent to improve the experience for their buyers? Why do they kind of struggle? I know sometimes I feel that when we talk to our clients, a lot of it's based on assumptions that we're making on the behalf of the prospect and what they're going to do logically and how they're going to experience and interact and engage, without really ever talking to the prospects or the people who have already purchased your services to find out what the experience really was and what really added value. So is a lot of people kind of sitting there thinking that they're imagining the prospect journey rather than getting really close to it. Do you find that?
Yeah, so you nailed the number one issue, which is the biggest problem is just a lack of empathy, a lack of really, seeing the world through your customer's eyes, seeing it through the construct of, whatever it is that you're selling that they might be considering. They're considering many other things as well. And I don't mean competitors. I mean, things that they're trying to figure out what they're going to have for dinner at the same time that they're going to figure out where is mom going to live for, her last decade or so. Right. And,
Yeah.
and so all those things mix, and we as sellers or marketers, we have a tendency to telescope, and we think too much from our perspective. So that's absolutely a problem. The other thing that is, I think, really interesting is that the biggest problem is we try too hard.
Okay.
We also overestimate what we can do, right? When I first got into sales, I was pretty good at it. I thought, hey, I could sell anything to anybody. I had friends, people said, you could sell ice to an Eskimo, right?
Right.
And back then I thought that was a compliment. Now I realize maybe it's not so much. We can't make anybody buy anything. We can't make anybody discover anything, right? I don't care how good your campaign is. I don't care what you sell. There's nothing that you're going to do that's going to cause somebody that would never consider something to do something. So we also have to understand that humans, we're social creatures. We like to get together. I mean, the last year has proven that. Even introverts like myself are like, where are the people?
Right.
and so there's a natural element that's there. We want to do things. We want to solve our problems. Like I always say, in sales is built on the idea that I have a solution to somebody's problem. And it's a problem that matters. And so if it's a problem that matters, the person or the organization that has the problem, they've got a pain. It hurts, right? Well, anybody that I talk to that has a pain when something hurts, you give them a magic wand, they're going to have the pain go away, right? So what we forget is if there's a problem, if there's a pain, the customer wants to solve it, right? The natural inclination, the intuitive inclination is they're going to move to solving it, right? We're going to look to people to help solve that. That's why word of mouth is so important. And so what happens is we create a lot of static, frankly. We actually confuse the situation because, here again, we've got intent. We're seeing the world through a telescope lens. We've got these external pressures. We have to meet a number. We've got investors. We have to pay bills. All these things come about that cause us to get out of alignment with the people that we're trying to work with the people that we're trying to influence. And, it's shocking to me still how often the reason that we're having a problem is we're getting in our own way. Really working to understand where are those key elements that make a difference, that really matter, and focusing on that. And then also, and this is hard because humans are not good at this, letting go, right? We've got to let go, and we've got to understand, we can lead, we can facilitate, but we can't do. I actually had a therapist who gave me this advice. It's probably the greatest sales advice I've ever gotten. And the therapist said, I could solve most people's problems in the first or second session. The problem is they're not ready. And I can't want them to change more than they want to, or that they're ready to change. And so what he told me was 80% of good therapy is creating the environment so that the patient is ready and capable, and being able to identify when that time comes to move into that set. And if you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. We try to rush it. And as a result of trying to rush it, we create a lot of conflict, a lot of static, and a lot of friction. And we're going to talk about that later. That's really, and I see it happen. Like a couple of years ago, my mom moved into a senior living community. So I got to see it firsthand. I got to see, instead of talking about it theoretically, how would people approach it? I got to see it. I got into a fight with my brother about it. We were down in Florida outside of the restaurant, and before we know it, we were like 13 and 16 again, and at it, right? Yeah. And so I got to see all those things that right. But I also got to understand, there was a greater context, and that fight, that was a feature. It wasn't a bug. Right. That's part of the process, if you will. And so sometimes you got to just let things play out. And I think that's one of the main reasons why great content, great idea, great product. We don't believe it enough, I think. Right. Which is a natural thing, right? We know every weakness about what our stuff is. So we kind of overcompensate, and that's really what gets in the way. And I like I said, I think we spend 2/3 of our effort giving our clients the confidence so that they can let go, to let the process play out instead of trying to over control or over engineer the process.
Amen. I totally agree with that. The sales folks get really nervous when, prospects just kind of go dark. And, they were engaged, they toured, they loved them. We went out. Oh, it was great, and then they would never pick up the phone. They stopped answering things. But what we're offering and what we're selling is really very emotional. It's a pivotal time. It's a relational sale. It's not a transaction. And so, a human nature, I think, and we're asking them to do something really hard, right? So you talked about people are looking at alternatives, and of course they are, not only your competitors, but maybe home care, or maybe doing nothing is also, we could do that. That's the easiest thing to do.
That's the biggest competitor in every industry I've worked in. The biggest competitor is nothing.
Exactly. And so, I think, in that context, it's probably natural as people are weighing things that the decision that we're trying to get them to make requires selling the house, fighting with their family, arguing with mom, trying to figure out what to do with all this stuff, making financial considerations. I mean, there's a lot of complexity to it. How do we in this industry create an environment that allows people the space to kind of go through that, and then pick them up where they are when they kind of come back into the engagement or into the conversation?
So I'm going to approach that from two levels, because you said something that stimulated a thought that I think is really important. You mentioned salespeople get nervous when the buyer goes dark, right? And I want to hit on why we get nervous. And to hit on why we get nervous, I want to take us back many, many years ago when cars didn't have computers, and you were out of town and you were at a meeting and the meeting was running long, and you're beginning to worry about, I got a flight that I got to get to. I got to get through security. Yeah. Finally, the meeting ends. You get in the car, you start going. You don't know exactly where you are related to the airport. You looked at a map before you went, maybe. You got in, and all of a sudden things don't look right. You feel like it's taking too much time. Have you ever noticed 5 miles when you've never done the 5 miles before? It takes 5 times longer than going back the other way when you know what the 5 miles are, right? And so you start and think about it. So you're on the highway. You're worrying about, am I going to get to the airport on time? Am I going to be able to return the car? All that. And what you see, road sign, exit, this. You're getting thrown lots and lots of information. What's happening to your anxiety level while that's all going on?
It's going up.
And as you think about it, every piece of information that you see causes the anxiety level to go up, right? So it's not, you don't know where you are, right? As a matter of fact, you've got too much information for where you are. The problem is you don't know where you are in relation to where you want to be. You have no context, right? GPS comes in. All of a sudden, that anxiety level, typically, GPS has been known to do some crazy things. But typically, GPS has been one of the greatest anxiety reducers, inventions of all time. So the cause of that is a lack of context. And so why do buyers get nervous? Lack of context, right? Lack of a map, right? So as a seller, I'm talking to you, and especially if you think about, the sellers that are going to be in senior living, they tend to be much more relational people. They're services oriented. They like people to like them. And so as long as the conversation is happening, there's a feeling, well, you actually feel like progress is being made, even though very often, if you actually look at it objectively, progress isn't being made. But it feels good because you've got that context of a rhythm. Then all of a sudden something happens, right? And you don't know where you are. You don't know where they are. You don't know what's supposed to happen. One of the fundamental problems that we identified in sales, especially the more complex, the bigger the problem, is the only 2 clear points in a sale are the beginning and the end. Everywhere else in between is this kind of big black box that makes everybody nervous. That's why structure is so important. What is supposed to happen? Where are they? Like, there are times where someone goes dark and I go, yeah, I fully expect them to go dark. That's normal. There are times if they all of a sudden stop returning calls, it's like, whoa, what's going on? So that same behavior means very different things at different points. That's why having a defined sales structure, that's why mapping a customer journey is so important. It's not just so that you can keyword optimize for the beginning of, it's so that you have an understanding. And if you do it right, they have an understanding. One of the things we teach salespeople in every industry is one of the first things that they should do is teach the process. This is how decisions get made. This is how we typically work. This is where things come in. Right? If you study the buying side of someone looking for a new home, and you add all the emotion of senior living, they don't know how to do this. They're only going to do this probably one time in their entire life. It's a really, really high risk. It requires you to admit many, many different things, and you have no context. Am I near the end? Am I still in the beginning? Am I at the end of the beginning? And so when you sit down, one of the best things a seller can do is to say, here's how you can make a really good decision. Here's the process that you should follow. That creates context for both buyer and seller. That reduces the anxiety level. That brings alignment. And by the way, a lot of those things like arguments and fears and all those things, they kind of go away because you have that context. Right. So that's kind of the underlying element. That's the cause that we have to solve. Now, we also have to understand that we live in a very different world today. I think people say something mistaken in the world of sales and marketing. We keep saying that the buyer has changed, and I do not believe that the buyer has changed. I believe the buyer has always wanted to control their journey. Humans from the beginning of time, we have always wanted to control our destiny. So it's not that the buyer wants to control the sales process today and they didn't want to control it 50 years ago. It was just that 50 years ago, they didn't have an option but to let the seller control it. Today they do, right? And so when you look at the role of sales and marketing, understanding where and how they work together and how that's changed is really important. We talk about change. We talk about the buyer changing. I'm going to ask people that are listening, A, do you agree that the buyer's changed? Or at least the environment, how buyers behave has changed. That's probably the more appropriate term since I just said buyers haven't changed, right?
Yeah.
If you don't agree with that, I'm sure you have podcasts that address that issue. Listen to those first, right? Have you changed at an equivalent level?
That's the question. Yeah, that's the real question. Yeah.
Right. You're still marketing and you're still selling fundamentally the same way you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Marketing and sales have always had kind of this, for lack of a better word, this silo relationship, right? Very clear lines of distinction. What is marketing? What is sales? And if you go into the old way, marketing was first, sales was second. Marketing framed, marketing positioned, marketing branded. Then once the conversation started off, now it's sales as well, right? And while there was conversation about sales and marketing being involved through, like the beginning was at least 90% marketing and the end was at least 90% sales. Probably about 5 or 10 years ago, the new way began to get some credence, and that's where as the buyer became more empowered, as digital became more dominant. Believe it or not, millennials are 40 years old, which by the way scares me because that means Gen Xers aren't that far away from having to make these decisions for themselves. I'm comfortable having to make this decision for my mom or help my mom make a decision. I'm not ready to be thinking about it, as a Gen Xer, right? Yeah. And so as that has all changed, marketing and sales began to move to a parallel relationship. Marketing has been more involved through the process, through content, website searches. 10 years ago, we learned about price from a salesperson. Today, we learn about price from a website, right? And so all those elements, but they're still not connected. They're parallel, but they're not connected, right? That's the new way. But that's not the right way. The right way is really get rid of this idea that marketing is marketing and sales is sales, right? And this is why, again, mapping that journey is so important. The right way is orchestrated, right? And as you go deeper into the process, the orchestration, it's kind of like a rope that's getting entwined together. It's sales and marketing working together in a seamless way. Does your website match what your leasing agents and salespeople say? Do your pictures align with? If I go to your website and I go into your communities, does it feel the same way?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of times where salespeople do a great job talking about the community, but you go to the website and the website looks, feels, and acts like every other community out there, right?
Yeah.
Well, I've got news for you. If your salesperson is telling your prospect how different you are and how special you are, but I don't feel that on the website, that's going to create cognitive dissonance, which is going to increase fear on the buyer side, decrease trust, and discount everything else that has happened, right? That's an example of what I'm saying, how we're getting in our own way, right? We know what makes us different because we're talking about it, but we haven't unified it, right? If the salesperson is the one that needs to explain something, this is why video is so important. If the salesperson needs to explain something all the time, guess what? You're in trouble because there's going to be a conversation that's going to take place that's going to be highly influenceable about various actions that are going to occur where that salesperson is not going to be able to be there, right? And so if your marketing resources don't enable that story to be told the way you want it to be told, then you're going to be relying on your prospect or your prospect's son or your prospect's sister explaining that. And if you want to know how bad that's going to turn out, all you got to do is think about the last time you went and saw a comedian live or on TV, and there was a joke that you just thought was the funniest that you'd ever heard. And so the next day you go to tell your friends, your peers, what that comedian said and did, and it doesn't go so well.
Right. It's just not the same.
Right. It just doesn't work. Right. And so that's where marketing and sales has to work together. One of the biggest changes that has occurred, I think, is that salespeople are more and more moving into a facilitation role. And the actual job of influence and the communication, historically, salespeople were responsible for communicating the value proposition, communicating what do we do. Mm-hmm. That's marketing's job today.
Yeah.
Sales's job is to facilitate the decision using the resources that marketing has created to reduce the effort involved to make a high risk decision. That's what sales and marketing today is all about.
So the old way was siloed, and then the
old way was
new
linear.
ways, yeah, parallel. Then we went to parallel,
right?
And now we're doing schmarketing.
There you go. Exactly. Perfect. Right. And so like the point that I want to make here is that we think of the linear way as silo, and now because marketing, we went to parallel, and there's this mistaken notion. Okay, well, it's not siloed anymore. But if you actually look at it underneath, it's as siloed as it was. It's just working in parallel, right? As opposed to it being, completely balled together. Because by the way, that's how decisions get made. The decision process is far more like following a ball in a pinball machine than it is following somebody down the road.
Yeah. It's definitely not linear. And I think, a lot of the way that we look at the prospect journey is that it's going to be logical and it's going to be linear and they're going to take these steps. And then we find out it's just this massive, maze of, all of these side paths that people go down. And, I think that marketing strategy certainly is always evolving and, not too many years ago, HubSpot and other folks came out with, marketing qualified leads versus sales qualified leads. And then taking the marketing qualified leads and advancing them to sales qualified leads. And we do a lot with that because we do a lot with marketing automation. But we very quickly realized that you couldn't say it's a sales qualified lead, done, marketing is out. Because just as often as not, people who moved into sales qualified and started engaging directly with the sales team, guess what? They went backwards. They went back into marketing qualified behaviors. And I think what we see a lot is, people who've maybe scheduled a tour and you think, oh, good, that's a high value conversion. We got them to tour. Now it's sales job. They're off and running, and I'm sure that they're going to deposit and move in. And then we see them come back to the website and download a brochure. And you're like, why would they do that? That's just not like logical, linear kind of, journey making. But we're people. It's like, humanity, right? So I had listened to a podcast by Rohit Bhargava, who wrote, what was it? Non-obvious megatrends. And, he talked about what people really want is the human experience. So I know in our previous conversation, you kind of talked about pivoting from high tech and high touch to where we are today, which is really high tech and no touch. So what has this kind of, change created, and how should we be pivoting?
Yeah. So it was somewhere around 1980, John Nesbitt wrote a book called Megatrends. So Rohit, I guess, wrote non-obvious megatrends. Nesbitt wrote megatrends. So I guess he wrote obvious megatrends.
Yeah.
And one of the trends, so if you go back to 1980, that's really, moving heavily into what got dubbed the information age. Technology became more and more of a real thing. Personal computers had been invented. And so technology became more and more a part of what was going on. And one of the things that Nesbitt identified was that as technology gets used more and more, the need for defined human action will increase with it. It's not tech instead of touch. And he dubbed that high tech, high touch. And anybody that's ever dealt with like Comcast, just to pick on Comcast because they're easy to pick on, Comcast, that customer service approach was a perfect example of high tech, low touch. Mm-hmm. And really what I would say is high tech, no humanity, right? So when you call somebody and you're talking to a service agent, and they're delivering scripted answers and they don't go off of a scripted place, I don't know about your listeners. I know for me, I get angrier more that I'm just not being heard.
Right.
This has moved to a place of illogic. And that's where, tech gets overutilized that destroys that experience. Now, one of the changes that connects to this idea of this of how orchestrated sales and marketing needs to work together is, I would say very easily, if you go back to say 2007, 2008, when websites became, must-haves, mm-hmm. Your website's job was to augment, support your sales efforts. Right. Today, your sales team, their primary job is to augment your website. Yeah. Right. Your website is your number one salesperson. Right. I don't care what you think. Your website is your website. And when I Google those two things, that's who you are. Right. Yeah. I don't care what you say. That's who you are. Right. And so what has happened with, applications like Uber, Google, the way we utilize technology has changed. The way technology interface has changed. Think about Amazon's grocery store. I desperately want to go to Amazon's grocery store because I just want to be able to walk in, pull my stuff, walk out, and not get arrested. Yeah. Like that just, to me, is just, I can't wait to be able to do that. Right. That's an example where that touch was low value touch. Right. And so I think if John Nesbitt could do it over again, I think he would say high tech, high human. Right. Yeah. And some of what has happened is that these touch elements were low value elements. They were actually extractions, right? Waiting online doesn't create value for anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
The feeling to control, right? It's bizarre. I don't get it. Back in the days when you could have somebody fill your gas, I chose the self-fill even before there was a price difference, right? When I go to the grocery store, the rare times I do, I am much more likely to go to the self-checkout than the actual checkout. Now that makes no sense. People say, well, why do you do that? I go, it's better service. Wait, hold on a second. That doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
There's no service there. How someone else is going to do it for me versus, right? That gets back to that control element. So what you're seeing and why technology needs to be utilized. Like I'm not a millennial, but I would prefer to have a chat or a text with somebody about something really simple. Because if I'm going to talk to you, that's a high cost investment for me. I've got to pay all my attention to you. There are all these things that are happening. And so like, I work with some companies that have insanely complicated sales processes, multi-year, buying committees, 20, 30. And the first thing I tell them is, if you could not have a salesperson sell, if a person was not allowed to interact with a prospect, how would you do it? And their first answer is, well, you can't. And I go, I know. But if you could,
yeah,
how would you do it? How close can we get to it? Now, I give them, after they struggle for a little bit, I give them one of the first giveaways. Well, what if instead of having your salesperson tell this to them live, what if they just recorded a video and someone watched a video? I'm like, oh, that's cheating. No, it's not cheating.
no.
Right? Because by the way, on video, I can make you go at like 200% if I want. I can skip ahead. I'm in control of that experience, right? And so when you look at this and you think about, tech is clearly a piece of it. And I think what you have to look at is high tech, high humanity, right? Especially in this market, right? I mean, there's nothing more human than where am I going to live? But where do the touches belong, right? Salespeople in their best role. And the thing that's cool about this is, the nature of the salesperson that works in senior living, they're not the typical profile of the salesperson that I would hire if I was in a tech company. They're very service oriented. They're very relationship oriented. It actually means that they're more naturally attuned to a facilitation role, right?
Yeah.
Your job is not to sell the community. Your job is to help somebody make a good decision about where should they spend their senior years, right? Now, the beauty is a good facilitator has far more influence than anybody because they help frame the conversation, they help frame the issues. And so marketing frames extraordinarily well, right? And so when you think about this, so if you were to conceive, and this is where, the blessing and the curse of 2020 was that I'm certain if I had said some of the things that I'm saying right now, and we were doing this on January 6th, 2020, people would be like, well, there's no way. No one's gonna, no one's gonna lease a unit without visiting. That's just never gonna happen.
That's what we thought.
Guess what? Right? It's happening, right?
Right.
And so the blessing and the curse is that limitations that we were imposing, because that's how it was always done, those have been loosened up quite a bit. So if you think about your experience, like smart tech is invading multifamily, right? Hey, I can get into my apartment or get into my unit without having to touch anything, talk to anybody. I can keep track of this, that, and don't have to talk to anybody. Those are all examples of where it's a high tech, no touch experience that creates a higher fidelity experience. I'm happier. It's more attuned to what I want to do. Looking at that in your sales process frees up your salespeople to be more relational, to be more advisory, to be more trusted, to help navigate those pitfalls that really are the reasons that people should be buying from you but aren't. Now, I always say there's 3 buckets. Bucket 1, they're the people that are going to buy from you no matter what. Be grateful for them. You want to make sure you're continuing to do the things that make them happy and they continue to buy from you, but you're not going to learn a lot from them because basically, unless you screw it up, they're buying from you.
Yeah.
Now there's this other group that's larger than the first group. They're just never going to buy from you. They're just never going to live in your community. It's never going to happen. This is one of the big mistakes we make. They'll show up sometimes, right?
Yeah.
We try to learn from them too much, right? Well, what could we do differently so that they would want to come here? Guess what? You couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
The biggest bucket that you want to look at is who's the group of people that should be living at your community but aren't, right? Who should be but aren't. What's happening there? Why is that not happening? That's the delta that you need to fill, and that's where tech, that's where marketing resources can support salespeople to guide through that process. And now, by the way, when I first go, maybe I should think about this. Mom falls down. Got to look at this. Got to start. Mom feels better now. Mom gets back to her walking 1.5 miles every day. She's back with her friends. Kids are back to being busy. They disappear. Well, guess what? That was supposed to happen, right? Very rarely does someone go, I haven't thought about this, and I go straight into looking at touring and buying, right? Mm-hmm. Now the difficulty historically is if I come into your community and don't buy, the cost and the challenge of maintaining that relationship and maintaining that vitality was huge. And by the way, you might not actually get to a serious point for 3 to 5 more years. And that's what it was from like the first time my mom talked about it. It was probably 3.5 years before, okay, it's now serious. That's why when she first said that she was looking at these places, I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. I'm sure it's, I thought it was going to come up 2 more times before it was actually really serious. The problem was the only people that you really had to maintain that relationship were salespeople. But you can't have a salesperson spending their time, which is the scarcest resource, on someone who's not going to buy for 3 years. Well, if you figure out how do you make it a no-touch experience, all of a sudden you are maintaining that relationship, right? You're bringing sales elements into marketing assets that enable you to support and sell more, and to sustain a consistency. And so when you look at it through the lens of maintaining the humanity, identifying where are the touches that matter, utilizing the technology to reduce or eliminate the touches that don't matter as much, that's really how you free yourself up to make sales easier, more effortless. And also, and this is the beautiful thing about it, it makes buying easier and more effortless. And probably the greatest lesson I ever learned was the single best thing a company can do to increase sales is make it easier for someone to buy.
Right. Yeah.
And this makes it easier to sell and easier to buy.
But you have to give up some level of control or perceived control.
Correct. You have to give up the illusion of control. It's like, why are people less afraid of driving than they are of flying, right? I promise you there's a higher likelihood if you're driving, you're going to cause a problem than if you're flying. Well, what does everyone say? I don't want to give up control. Guess
right.
What? You don't have control. You don't have control
right.
with that other car.
Yeah. This comes up a lot with like telling, having a conversation about, being transparent and putting your pricing or at least starting at pricing and allowing people to self-navigate to some degree before having to have that face-to-face or voice-to-voice interaction. And the pushback always is, well, no, but if I talk to them, then I'm going to be able to infuse the value behind the pricing. I can't just give them the pricing. I'm like, if you don't, someone else will. And it's probably going to be a third-party lead aggregator that's going to sell the lead back to you at a very high premium because guess what? Your pricing is already out there. If it's not on your website, it's on a Place for Mom website. It's on a caring.com website. And so who do you want to have control over that, over generating that lead?
And you just nailed it. You actually don't lose control. You actually gain control. right? You want to infuse the value behind the price. The infusing the value behind the price doesn't come at the end when historically salespeople talk about price. It comes at the very beginning when you're teaching what's involved in making a good decision. So what is a good community, right? So you're priced above your competition. Why are you priced above your what's the value behind that? Well, teach that early, right? Don't just put the price on your website. Put the price on your website and put the learning resources for how to analyze and tell the difference between and understand. Like, I haven't seen anybody that's got a good piece of content that explains how rents are determined in senior living.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, there's obviously a cost directly involved, but that's not all of it, right? Somebody that put a good piece together that explains this is what leads to the rent that you're being charged, that would explain what that was. That's actually infusing the value behind the price, right?
Right.
And if you're not going to teach it to me, then I'm going to try to teach it to myself, which I'm probably not going to do a very good job of, or I'm going to go to an aggregator that's selling, we're going to save you money, which is going to diminish value. Right.
Yeah.
So you actually gain more control. I used to have this problem when I talked to companies about blogging. Right. And
yeah,
they would start a blog and it would be like what I scientifically refer to as a crappy blog. There was nothing valuable whatsoever. And like when I said, you got to put your good stuff out there. I'm like, well, no, we can't put our good stuff out there. If we put our good stuff out there, someone's going to steal it. I said, well, here's the definition of good stuff. Does somebody want to steal it? Right? Because if somebody doesn't want to steal it, then it's not good stuff. But here's the thing that's really cool. Challenger Sale came out in 2009. Big research book in sales. They called the primary archetype of a great salesperson, they called them a challenger. Well, we started calling the role provoker in 2005. We have blogs that talk about the provoker role. Now, if you looked at how we describe provoker and how challenger describes challenger, nails on. Right? Mm-hmm. Guess what? If I hadn't blogged what I blogged before 2009, and I talked about what we created, and I'm not saying that Challenger did not steal it from us, right? That's not
right.
But if I hadn't put that out there, Challenger would own it completely. I wouldn't be able, like, if me talking about it, I would be one of those people that's just copying X. But because I put it out there, no one can steal it because I can always demonstrate that it was mine.
Right.
And so again, it's that same thing. It's letting go of that illusion of control actually gives you more control.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Allowing people to have choice in how they want to engage, how they want to consume information, and what they want to do next and what adds value. If you're the person out, putting out that type of content and also demonstrating humanity and empathy, because we can't wait for the prospect to connect to the sales team to have a human and empathetic experience. So somehow we have to, in this no-touch digital environment, still infuse empathy and humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where structure comes in, right? I mean, too often we make sales. I've always said salespeople get far too much credit when a sale is made, and they get far too much blame when a sale isn't made. Too often we make sales despite ourselves, not because of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Documenting what is that customer journey, documenting how do you generate interest, how do you turn interest into curiosity into consideration into decisions. What is that map? Where is it structured? When is the right time for these different pieces of content? Again, all the pieces are there, but that lack of the map, that lack of the structure makes it difficult to impossible to be able to take the right decision at the right time with the right person. And even more so to be able to learn through iterations, because too often things are happening randomly, right? It's too much by feel. And when you bring, again, we talk about the illusion of control, there's this belief that, it's always different. Well, yeah, it's always different, but it's also always the same, right? It is true, both of those things. And what good structure does is it actually frees up creativity, right? It feels, when we look at it, it feels constraining. But again, it goes back to this GPS, right? Instead of me having to think, okay, what comes next? What do I have to do? The structure drives it. Actually, Peter Drucker said it, I think 50 years ago. He said, build the genius into the system, right? That's how you grow a company. You build the genius into the system. And that's where, and by the way, I think with where we are today, it is the most exciting time. Like I think if I had what was available to companies today, when I started my business in 2004, I wouldn't even know what to do with myself. There's so much excitement in what's there, right? There's so much that we can do. We just have to slow down, put the pieces together, and then operate through, we call it hypothesis-driven growth. Have a hypothesis, implement it. Because you've got a structure in place, you see what happens, you learn from it, you make the adjustment, you execute, you learn, execute, learn, right? And it actually goes from being this, I call it, this treadmill of business. Every day we're running faster and faster just to be able to keep pace, right? That is not sustainable anymore. We've got to look and identify where are the high value pieces, make sure we're supporting that, right? And where are the places that frankly, it just gets in the way, eliminate those things to really free up our ability to make more better connections and to grow.
Yeah. Oh, you said so much there. I could talk to you all day. I think the one thing that I'd love to touch on just before we close out is because you mentioned about kind of the role of provoking, and that's kind of part of a good sales process. And there's lately been a lot of conversation about prospects really expecting this frictionless experience, just get out of their way. They expect instant knowledge. It's their desire and their hunger to kind of curate their own information, when they want, where they want, how they want. But I know that you have a different kind of way of looking at friction. So I'd love it if you could just kind of touch on that real quick.
Yeah. So first off, there's this perception that friction is bad. What I like to say is friction is. I'll give you an example of really good friction. There's really good friction on your car. The treads on your tire, the reason that there are treads are to create friction, right? If those treads weren't there, the moment there was a speck of water on the road, you'd be flying off the road, right? That friction, that friction gives you traction. I'll give you another example of friction. A great conversation with a friend, right? I'm going to go so far as to say is there's no high value experience that doesn't have friction. Okay. It's just that the experience was high value, so we don't think of it as friction, right? All friction does is slow you down. That's all it does, right? The reason that friction is bad, the reason that we talk about friction as a bad thing is that we have accidental friction. We have lots of places of friction where there's no value, right? Why do I have to call you? Why does the New York Times let somebody subscribe digitally, but they have to call to cancel? Right. Well, we know why. The reason why is cancellations are reduced, right? Now, one could make the argument that that's good because, I read something that I don't like, and if it was totally frictionless, I could just cancel it. I hate this. Whereas if I have to call somebody, I have to think about this. So there's research. I used to be a financial advisor, and if you study financial advisors, their investments perform on average far worse than their clients' investments do. And they researched it to figure out why, and they found out why. The reason: there's no friction for a financial advisor to make a trade. The client has to call the financial advisor to make a trade, right? That advisor, I want to get rid of IBM. Well, hold on, let's look at, or I just read X, let's buy, buy. Right. Well, the problem, and I learned when I was a financial advisor, all I had to do, before E-Trade was this super huge thing, et cetera, I could just come on commission. I was commissionless before there was commissionless. Yeah. Hey, this is really cool. And I could just hit enter and I buy it. It was totally frictionless. But you know what? I learned the hard lesson when in investing, the right decision is no decision 9 times out of 10. I learned that what I had to do was I had to slow down. The number one benefit I brought to my clients was I made them slow down, right? that was high value friction. Now, they never called it friction. They called it a great client experience, right? So here again, there are points where we want someone to slow down, right? How do we do that? How do we make them slow down in a way that's high value, right? And so, we're so focused on do more and more and more and more and more. That's been the play in sales and marketing for 50 years. Mm-hmm. Do more. I bet you if I look at your business plan or your sales plan 5 years ago versus today, I bet you there's 30% more that you're doing today than you were doing 5 years ago. But what have you done to reduce the effort to do those things, right? That's where we want to eliminate friction, right? Those are the aspects about eliminating. But where are the places where if we did fewer things, we'd get more? Like in that early stage, I want someone to slow down. I don't want someone to go, bam, visit. So I'm going to use video to highlight some certain things, give you kind of a virtual tour, but also infuse in that virtual tour important things for you to consider that connect to other pieces of content that cause me to stop and think. Because the single best thing I can do for somebody who's going to make a really important decision is get them to think about what is involved in the decision before they get into actively making the decision. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's a place where I can add some friction, slow things down, improve the results for everybody, reduce the overall effort that's required. No one's going to call that friction, but it's still friction. Right. Yeah. And so again, it's where are those high value moments and how do you amplify them and how do you eliminate the low value moments?
Yeah, I guess one example that comes up a lot, sometimes I'll talk to salespeople and we're reviewing leads or something, and I'll say, well, what else are they considering? Maybe they had a first tour and it's been a few weeks and there's been no contact. And I say, well, tell me about, your conversation around other options. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to bring up other options. I don't want to talk about that, as though if you don't talk about it, they're not going to come up, with things on their own, like, well, we could have home care, or we could move in, or mom can move in with us, or whatever. But if I inject that difficult conversation and I create that friction, then I have the ability to somehow influence and help them talk through the pros and cons of those other considerations. Is that an example of
yeah, that's a great, that's a perfect example. And you also highlight, you highlighted both a perfect example of where adding some friction is good and a perfect example of where friction is bad, right? When do most organizations deal with that question, that concern of they've suddenly stopped responding? Mm-hmm. They deal with it after it happens. Well, here's the thing. We know that a certain percentage of people that's going to happen, right? The time to think about that is before it happens, right? So that when you're in that moment, so when the salesperson is in that moment and they're executing, they're not having to think about this, or this. It's you'll reduce the likelihood of it happening because you've mapped it out. That going back to that context, right? Mm-hmm. And B, when you slow down and you have to figure that out, not only does that eat up massive amounts of time, it eats up massive amounts of confidence. And salespeople can't do anything if they don't have confidence. Mm-hmm. And it eats up a lot of energy. And so it might only take 5 minutes, but I guarantee you, every time that happens, it has the cost of a day, right? Whereas if you think about it in advance and there are, there's a plan in place, there are protocols in place, even let's say you have it's these 3 scenarios and someone goes, well, it's not quite any of those. Mm-hmm. But just by knowing, well, because it's not that, I now know a lot more about what to do without having to stop, without having to think, just because that thinking got done in advance. That's a place where you eliminate the friction. Right, that's where friction is bad, is when we deal with it at points of execution. I'll go so far as this. Friction is bad when it's not purposeful.
Yeah. Yeah. I find you can learn so much by asking those how questions, because how questions force people to provide a strategy. Like the answer has to be thoughtful. So things like, I always used to ask, how are you as a family going to go through this decision process together? Well, if I ask that how question, then they're going to say, well, I'm going to, I'm the adult daughter, so I'm going to do the initial research, and then I'm going to narrow it down, and I'm going to call X number of places, and then I'm going to visit X number of places, and then I'll bring in the other family members, and we'll do this, and then I'll call my brother in California because he's got the financial power of attorney, and we'll do that, and then we'll bring in, the parents. But they're almost giving you their own personal roadmap of how they're going to make this decision, or asking how they made a similar decision. Like, how did you choose the college for, do you have kids in college? How did you make that decision? Another high value, high risk to some degree in a transitional time in life. That's formative, right?
You know what the real answer for 9 out of 10 times, you know what the real answer to that question, how are you going to go about making this decision? We don't really know.
Which is a great opportunity to say, well, maybe I can help. This is
right. And
they've only done it once, but I've done it 1,000 times, right?
and when someone says we're going to do this, that's where you also going to say, well, have you considered this? How are you going to handle that? I'll give you another question, how question. That's a money question, right? Yeah. So I know we've talked about a lot of theory and concepts up here. Let's get to brass tacks tactical.
Yeah.
How are you going to know that you found the right place?
Oh, I love that question. I asked it all the time. And you really get to you at least get to their non-negotiables. And that's a good starting place. And then you can evolve into wish list, and motivation and timing and other things come from that. I love that question. How are you going to know?
And so we talk about challenger and provoker, right? What I'm going to suggest is don't just stop there to their answer. This is where what challenger really means is you teach something. Mm-hmm. And so so they give the answer and you say, well, earlier you mentioned X. Have you considered Y? Mm-hmm. Earlier you said this. How are you going to do that? Because I think even in the best case, how are they going to know that they found the right place? They're going to have 70% of the answer, right? In the best case, right? They're still that's where you can help teach them. Let's look at these pieces. And, in essence, that's the highest level of influence you can have. You're influencing the decision criteria. And the reason that they go dark is they start jumping in to different places. They haven't thought about what the right thing is. And they get so confused that they go, just leave me alone. Let me go somewhere else.
Yeah. Yep. Mom seems to have stopped falling. So let's just...
That's right.
Let's just put it on the shelf for now. Well, I so enjoyed our conversation, and just in case people want to get in touch with you, learn more about Imagine, have a conversation with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
You can visit our website at imaginellc.com. We've got chat, and you can schedule a meeting there. You can get me on Twitter at Doug Davidoff. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can throw questions at me. We've got a couple different podcasts ourselves, so you can hear, our thoughts on sales, overall business development, et cetera. I'm easy to find.
All right. Well, we'll have all that information in the show notes. And Doug, I so appreciate you sharing your senior living marketing perspectives with you. And hopefully we'll maybe see you at Smash next fall.
I hope so. Thank you, Deborah. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks.